This is the new Askar V, and it's a triplet refractor telescope made for astrophotography that has not just one focal length, but 6 different focal lengths. I'm Sarah Matthews, and in this video, we're going to walk through the features and specifications of the Askar V. We're then going to explore the different modular configurations that are possible with this telescope, and then we're going to explore what the pros and the cons of having a system like this is. So, grab a snack and let's dive in. So Sharpstar Optics, the creators of the Askar V, sent me this pre-production unit for review, and I must say I was very intrigued by the fact that it has 6 different focal lengths and 6 different focal ratios, and that it also appeared pretty portable. And so this pre-production unit has a couple differences to the current production model that's in production right now, and I will point out what all of those differences are in this review. And as with any review that I ever do, I have complete editorial control over my content, and all views are 100% my own. So, modular. What does that even mean here? But more importantly, what are the pros and the cons of something like this? That's really the question we're trying to get to the heart of in this video. So let's start off by answering the first question of what modular even means here. So the Askar V at its core is really more of a system. And the system, the Askar V, has 5 interchangeable components that you can mix and match together to use this system in different modes. So there are 8 modes total, 6 are for imaging and 2 are for visual astronomy. So let me break it down by the 5 optical components that the Askar V system comes with. There are 2 interchangeable front-end objective lenses. There is a 60mm objective lens and an 80mm objective lens. Both of these are triplet APO aprichromats, meaning there are 3 glass elements inside of each of them, 2 of which are ED glass or extra dispersion glass. So in theory, this should correct for chromatic aberration. In addition to these 2 objective lenses, the Askar V also comes with 3 corrective accessories, a focal reducer, a field flattener, and a focal extender. So you can use any of the 3 corrective accessories here with the 2 objective lenses, despite the fact that both of these objective lenses have different apertures and different focal ratios. But essentially, this gives you 3 different focal lengths and 3 different focal ratios for each of the 2 objective lenses, ranging from 270mm of focal length all the way up to 600mm of focal length, and focal ratios ranging from f4.5 to f7.5. So in terms of imaging targets and compositions, you have your smaller, more portable 60mm configurations that are going to be great for wide field emission nebulae. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a narrower field of view for medium-sized galaxies and medium to smaller size emission nebulae and reflection nebulae. But you can also use the same target and just use different compositions, which kind of gives you a little bit more freedom to think creatively as far as framing up a target in a different way that we don't normally get to as astrophotographers. Now let's talk about the 2 visual astronomy modes. So the Askar V has a visual back that supports 2 sets of adapters, a 1¼ inch and a 2-inch adapter, so you can use diagonals of either size along with eyepieces with either of the 2 objective lenses. So here you have the 8 modes, you have 4 for each objective lens, and all of this entire triplet refractor telescope system is $1,695 US at least time of filming. So now let's get into what came in the box. Alright, here we are with the Askar V box. Let's open it up. So we have this black hardshell carrying case covered with an Oxford cloth material. This type of fabric is usually pretty durable when it comes to dust and water, which is nice for traveling with. On the bottom here, we have 4 black risers. All right, let's open this up. So everything in this case is nestled in gray foam cutouts. Now let's start over here to the right. We have a 5mm Allen wrench. We also have a blower for dust, and we also have a block cutout for an electronic autofocuser. And to the left, we have the back end accessories, the V reducer, the V flattener, and the V extender. Next to that, we have the V 60mm objective lens. And last but not least, we have the Askar V OTA, as well as the V 80mm objective lens mounted on it. So everything fits nicely in this case right here. Now let's get into the features and specs a little bit more. All right, getting into the features and specifications, we're going to look at the OTA first, and when I am referring to the OTA, I'm referring basically to this part of the tube. This is the 80mm objective lens, which we will get into later. So we have a nice white powder coated OTA tube here, and it looks like it has a pretty smooth sealing finish to it, and it is secured in this silver anodized clamshell ring. The clamshell ring is nice because since you are going to be using different configurations with this entire setup, you can just open this up and then distribute the weight differently. The inside of the clamshell ring is lined with felt so as to not damage the tube here. All right, moving right along, on top of the clamshell ring, we have this multifunctional handlebar. Here's one function, and that is, of course, picking it up. That's really nice if you're going to be placing it onto a mount, which I would assume that you are. And then you can place different accessories on the dovetail bar here. So something like a guide scope, guide camera, ASIR, something else. And then you have these little holes with these thumb screws here. All right, moving on to the bottom here, we have this dovetail plate, and this Vixen dovetail is 300 millimeters long, so you can definitely distribute the weight in different ways, which is also nice because, again, you are going to be using this, or the thought is that you'd be using this in different configurations. So we have this finder base right here, and we have two thumb screws, so you can mount different accessories. Again, if you wanted to mount something like a finder scope, a power box, you could also do that here. Also on the other side, you have two screws on the other side, so if you wanted to use a finder base here, you could definitely do that, or if you wanted to move this finder base over to here, you could do that as well. So moving on, we have our focuser down here. It's just your standard dual speed rack and pinion focuser. So we have the coarse adjustment knob to here on my right, and then we have this fine tune adjustment cap. So this is what we have fully extended. On the tube itself, the focuser tube itself, there are graduation marks, which is nice if you're going to be manually focusing. And then over here, we have the 360-degree rotator, and so you can move your camera around to get different compositions. All right, moving on to the back of the OTA, we have a visual back, and we have compression rings with a 1 1/4 inch adapter. So if you wanted to use a diagonal for that, you could. And then for the 2 inch, we have 3 thumb screws, and we have compression rings in there. So if you wanted to use a 2 inch diagonal, that's where you would put that. And the visual back threads off. This is where you would insert the accessories, which I will go over later. All right, now let's move on to the objective lens. This is the 80mm objective lens, like I mentioned before. We have the same white powder coated tube color, and it has this nice sealing to it as well, so everything matches. But on the bottom, there's this little hole. The production models will not have this, or they shouldn't have it. And over here, we have this thumb screw, and this is for the lens hood, and this is what it looks like extended. And then in the front, we have a lens cap. It's a threaded lens cap, the same silver anodized aluminum it looks like. So it says 80, that checks out. So here we can look into the optics. On the inside of the lens hood, we have all of the markings. We have some baffles as well. So overall, very nice. All right, moving right along, here we are with the 60mm objective lens. Again, same white color, it's powder coated, and we have the same colors as far as the accents with the gray anodized rear end threaded cover and front end threaded cover. There is not a retractable lens hood, and that's because the lenses are recessed in there, so it kind of acts as a lens hood in there. And of course, you also have your markings as well. Overall, the threads feel really nice for both the 80mm and the 60mm objective lens. Ziz. All right, so we have the corrective accessories right here, the V reducer, the V flattener, and the V extender. They all have the same make and feel to them, and all three of them have front and back dust covers that you can remove that are threaded. And on the back here, we have a 54mm adapter, and we also have a 48mm adapter with the threaded dust cap on that. We also have a 2-inch filter adapter as well. Now let's get into all of the different modular configurations. We're going to start off with the two visual astronomy modes. So we're starting with the 80mm objective lens with the visual back. Now again, the visual back can support diagonals of either 2 inches or 1 1/4 inch. And so with a diagonal like this and an eyepiece, you would be using the 80mm objective lens with the visual back at 500mm of focal length with a focal ratio of f6.25. All right, now we are going to be using the 60mm objective lens on the OTA, so we just need to swap the 80mm for this. Thread this off. And then I'm going to take off the rear threaded cap for the 60mm, and I'm going to thread the 60mm into the OTA. Okay. Now with the 60mm with the visual back, either using a 2-inch diagonal or 1 1/4 inch diagonal, you would be using the native focal length of this 60mm aperture objective lens, which is 360mm at f6. So those are the two visual modes. Now let's get into the imaging modes. So I'm going to start with the reducer. And what I want to do is, because I'm using this 60mm objective lens, I need to adjust the scale of the reducer to 60. So you'll see these markings here. It says 80 right now, but I'm going to move it so it can be usable with the 60mm. So I'm going to turn the reducer's lens 3 times, and it's going to enter what's called the floating state. This is basically when you can just pull it up. And then here we have the 60, and it is always going to be the same size, so you don't have to worry about there being any variation as far as whether or not this is going to accommodate the 60mm or the 80mm, because there are 2 lines that indicate it, and it locks for each of the scales. All right, now we can remove the 2-inch dust cover here, as so. And then we're going to remove the visual back by unthreading it. That over here. Then I'm going to take this, and you should see threads here, and I'm just going to thread it in here. So one difference between the pre-production model and the model that's currently in production now, there will be fewer threads for you to have to thread the accessories onto. So that basically means that it'll take less time to thread them on. But even with the amount of threads that I currently have on this pre-production model, it still is pretty seamless to do. From the M48 adapter to your camera's sensor, the back focus for all of the different correctors to your camera sensor is going to be 55mm of back focus. And if you are going to use the 54mm adapter, that is going to require a back focus of 73mm to your camera sensor, which you would use for a full frame camera sensor. The additional back focus needed after threading off the M48 adapter does allow you to use different types of accessories as well. So I'm going to grab my ASI 533 MC Pro, and I'm going to put it on here really quick. So there is the camera here. And again, since I'm using the M48 adapter, I just thread off the dust cap here. You could also, again, put your 2-inch filter in right here. And then again, I need 55mm of back focus, and voila. So this kind of gives you an idea of a very lightweight setup, just a very easy portable configuration. And the total focal length is 270mm with a focal ratio of f4.5. Now to remove the accessory, I'm just going to place the threaded cap back on. Now I'm just going to unscrew the reducer. Okay, the cap back on. Now for the flattener, again, just adjust the scales. Okay, 60mm. Now we can take off the dust cap on the front. Cool. And now we can insert it into. All right, now we can add the adapters and the camera, and we could add the 2-inch filter into the filter adapter as well. Again, 55mm of back focus from the M48 adapter, and there we have it. So this setup with the 60mm objective lens and the flattener is going to give you the native focal length of 360mm at f6. And now I'm just going to remove the flattener and put the extender on. All right, so I have removed the flattener. Now I'm going to add the extender. Again, we're at the 60 scale here. Remove the dust cap. All right, so with the 60mm objective lens and the extender, we have a focal length of 446mm and an f ratio of f7.43. All right, now I'm going to remove the 60mm lens and swap it for the 80mm lens, and then I'm going to put the reducer back on. Okay, so we have the 80mm objective lens threaded onto the OTA. Again, we need to adjust the scale to 80. I'm going to twist it the other way. Okay, again, we are at 80, and you will hear, or you will feel it click into place, removing the dust cover. All right, putting that into the back. All right, let's add our camera. And so again, the back focus for using the M48 adapter to your camera's sensor is going to be 55 millimeters of back focus. And if you're going to use the M54 adapter for something like a full frame, then to the camera sensor, you would need a working back focus of, or a working distance of 73 millimeters. So here we are with the 80 millimeter objective lens and the focal reducer. So we have a focal length of 384 millimeters with an f ratio of f4.8. All right, now I'm going to show you what the flattener looks like with the 80 millimeter objective lens. Okay, so we have the flattener. Again, I'm going to adjust the scale to 80. Okay, it's tightened and it's above this line here. Remove the dust cap, thread it in the back. All right, so here we have the entire setup. We have the 80 millimeter objective lens with the field flattener for a focal length of 495 millimeters and an f ratio of f6.18. All right, now I'm going to put on the extender. All right, so here we have our final imaging mode for a focal length of 600 millimeters and an f ratio of f7.5. And now we're going to get into the pros and the cons and look at the optics. So getting into the different pros and cons of having a modular system, specifically this modular system, we're going to start off with looking at the aesthetics overall. And so in my opinion, I really like the white and the gray. I think it's pretty sleek looking. And as far as the different configuration go, I mean, everyone looks the same basically, and so you don't really have to worry about having one corrective accessory looking different. I mean, I know that's sometimes the case where you might have an objective lens, but you have to get a corrective accessory from a different brand, or you have to get a different color. So I'm not saying aesthetics are everything, they're certainly not, but there definitely is a sense of pride that one may get while looking at their rig, and it looks good. But I know that's not as important to everyone, but if it is, that's something to consider. So now let's get into the workmanship or the craftsmanship of the Askar V system. All of these components are very nicely manufactured. And then as far as the corrective accessories and the mechanics for those corrective accessories, I think that being able to adjust the scales to be appropriate for the different size objective lenses is awesome. I think mechanically it was a great design. I do have to tip my hat to that. That was really nice. All right, now let's get into the user experience pros and cons. So starting off with the 3 corrective accessories, I think that this is just a really nice user experience. The fact that you can use all 3 of them with either of the 2 objective lenses, despite the fact that these 2 objective lenses are different aperture sizes and have different focal ratios. They make it very easy for the end user to use these corrective accessories, which I just really like. And as far as not having to spend all this time researching what corrective accessories that you're going to need for an objective lens, that's already, done for you. You don't have to spend all this time trying to figure that out, because sometimes it's not always straightforward, and I can say that from direct experience. And so saving you time is really nice. And also it saves you money. The fact that you can use these 3 different accessories for 2 different objective lenses rather than having to get separate accessories for a objective lens like you would normally need to. That's also a huge win. I don't know if you would categorize that as user experience, but I'm gonna bucket that in this group. One last pro I will talk about from the user experience perspective is the fact that you need a back focus of 55 millimeters from the 48 millimeter adapter to your camera sensor. That being consistent across all the corrective accessories and the objective lenses is really nice. You don't have to fiddle around with all of the different adapters that you would need. And if you did want to use the full frame, you could just use the 54 millimeter adapter, and then that would be 73 millimeters of back focus that you would need. And so overall, the fact that all of this comes together pre-packaged basically for $1,695 US is really a great bargain in my opinion. All right, now let's get into some of the downsides of the user experience for a system like this. So yeah, I mean, it's cool that you have 2 objective lenses, but you can only use them 1 at a time. So if you're someone that does have 2 different mounts, then yeah, you wouldn't be able to get double the data at the same time. So, I mean, that is something to consider. So at least from my testing, and when I was testing this, I was of course, swapping out the objective lenses. I was swapping out all of the different components, the accessories. That definitely introduced dust into the imaging system, but then again, I don't know how often people would be switching them out. I don't think anybody would be switching them out as often as I was for testing purposes. So, and the other con that I would say from a user experience perspective that kind of is TBD, or to be determined, is whether or not people would use all of the different focal lengths and focal ratios. The fact that the 60mm flattener and the 60mm extender configurations are pretty similar to the 80mm configurations, I'm not sure how often you would use that, but one thing to consider is that the 60mm objective lens with the accessories is going to weigh less. So if you want to use something like the Skywatcher GTI, you could definitely use the 60mm with any of the accessories and a camera, and it would be at a good weight limit. And I don't know if people are going to start approaching imaging from the perspective of, okay, I have all of these different focal lengths. How can I frame up my targets differently? Traditionally, we haven't really had the opportunity to think about different compositions at different focal lengths as much as we would here. I mean, yeah, you could get, a focal reducer that does give you a wider field of view and maybe some faster optics, and you might have a camera with a bigger or larger sensor, but as far as just being able to, think of compositions in a different way, I don't know if that's going to be the new take, but it could be, and I hope that made sense what I just said. But yeah, so those are just some things to consider with a modular system like this. But overall, the different configurations are pretty lightweight, so if you have something like an AM3 or an AM5, then this might be a nice pair with either of those. And so if you are a beginner looking for a wider field of view setup, a triplet refractor that is both, portable, then this is maybe something to look at. All right, now let's get into the pros and the cons of the optics of this system. So for testing the optics of the Askar V system, I tested all 6 imaging configurations with the ASI 533 MC Pro one-shot color camera. This camera has 3.76 micron sized pixels, which does pair well with most of these configurations and gives us some good imaging skills. Well, those factors as well as the seeing conditions I had. This will give us some good insight into the overall color correction of the optics of the Askar V, and if other types of optical aberrations appear, we will also address those. Also, since this camera has a 1-inch square sensor, it is smaller in comparison to an APS-C or full-frame camera sensor, but fear not, if you want to get a good idea about field flatness for larger sensors, check out Queeve the Lazy Geek's review that he did of the Askar V on his YouTube channel, as well as Nico Carver's review of the Askar V over on the Nebula Photos YouTube channel. For their testing, they both used an ASI 2600 MC Pro one-shot color camera, which has an APS-C size sensor if you're not as familiar with that camera. But the 1-inch square sensor we have here will still give us a good idea about field flatness, nevertheless, and other types of optical aberrations if they do exist. So let's start off here in PixInsight. We're going to begin with the longest focal length configuration and make our way down to the shortest focal length configuration. So over here we have a 3-minute exposure of the North American Nebula NGC 7000 taken with the 80mm objective lens and the focal extender, giving us a focal length of 600mm and a focal ratio of f7.5. Now, this is a raw exposure. I have only debayered it so we can actually see the colors of the image, and I use the VNG algorithm within the debayer process of PixInsight to do this for anyone who is wondering. So since it is in a linear state, that's why it's all dark, let's apply an unlinked auto stretch to it with the screen transfer function process over here to see what we have. I'm just going to unlink the colors and apply the auto stretch, and there we go. Minimize that. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So overall, at first glance, everything looks pretty good. I'm just going to zoom into the center really quick. I do see some blue fringing on this area of the star and on some of the other larger stars in the center as well, right here with some kind of yellow-red over here. Now, if this is consistent throughout the frame, that will be interesting. So let me open up the aberration inspector. Script, image analysis. So with that tool, I'm basically just creating this mosaic where I can see all 4 corners of the image, as well as the center here, 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 and here, as well as the actual center of the frame as well, all zoomed in at the same time. So like I said, there's some blue fringing on this area of the star in the middle with some yellow and red. And then let's just go over to a corner. That blue fringing and the yellow and red fringing on the other area seems to be consistently on the same sides. I keep saying sides, but I just mean same areas. The blue fringing is all pointing this way, and the red and yellow is pointing up this way. which kind of leads me to believe that it's not longitudinal or lateral chromatic aberration. I actually think it is atmospheric dispersion, which would make sense because this was the first frame that I took in the test that day or that night, and NGC 7000 was lower on the horizon compared to the other images that I'm going to show you. But overall, everything looks pretty good. So let's move on to the 80mm objective lens and the field flattener. All right, so we have the 80mm with the field flattener image here. Again, raw exposure, nothing's been done to it except for debayering. Same area of the night sky, NGC 7000. So let's give it a screen transfer auto stretch. So the focal length here, 495mm with a focal ratio of f6.18 or f6.2. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. So overall, at first glance, everything looks really good. I don't see any immediate issues. Let's open up the aberration inspector. So again, here we are at the center. And then here at the corners, or at this corner, no immediate signs of chromatic aberration, maybe like a tiny bit, just a tiny bit of lateral chromatic aberration, but a little bit hard to tell. But maybe just a tiny bit. All right, really good stuff with the 80mm objective lens and the field flattener. So let's move on to the 80mm with the reducer. All right, so we have our 80mm objective lens with the reducer image right here. Let's apply a screen transfer function auto stretch to it. The focal length here is 384mm with a focal ratio of f4.8. Zoom this in a bit. So at first glance, nothing too out of the ordinary other than this nice satellite trail looks like. Let's open up the aberration inspector. Okay, so again, everything looks pretty decent at the center, although there is some slight blue fringing, it looks like, over on this area of the star. So we're here at the top right-hand corner, and we can see that there's blue fringing on the area of the star pointed towards the center, and then on the other area of the star, on the other side, I guess, you can see reddish yellow pointed towards the corner. I think this is lateral chromatic aberration, just given that we're seeing the blue fringing all on the areas of the stars and all of the corners that are pointed towards the center. Even here, see how this is going towards the center, but definitely some issues with flatness of the image, obviously elongated stars. And here we can see the blue pointed towards the center, the red and yellow pointed the other way, and elongated stars as well, but the blue is still pointed towards the center. So this is definitely lateral chromatic aberration, or I'm pretty sure it's lateral chromatic aberration, and the field is not totally flat. All right, now let's move on to the 60mm objective lens with the extender. Okay, so we have our first 60mm objective lens test with the focal extender. Focal length is 446mm, f7.43, same region of the night sky, and 3-minute exposure as well. So at first glance, everything looks good. All right, now let's look at the aberration inspector image. Yeah, so far so good. Now let's move on to the 60mm with the V flattener. Okay, here we are with the 60mm objective lens and the field flattener image, NGC 7000, 3-minute exposure, right? So there's the center again, looks good. Over to the side, or over to the edge. Stars look pretty flat, maybe a little bit of chromatic aberration, but not terrible. So we have one more image to go. It is the 60mm with the reducer. All right, our last image, the 60mm objective lens with the V reducer, giving us a focal length of 270mm with a focal ratio of f4.5. Apply a screen transfer function auto stretch. Zoom in. Does seem to be a little bit of green, but not terrible. I don't know. Oh, yeah, this looks, yeah, there's definitely purple here and green. So a little bit of chromatic aberration. This is called longitudinal chromatic aberration with the purple and green fringing. And that's not totally to be unexpected though with a reducer like this and when you're at f4.5. So let's take a peek at the corners. Looking at the corner, we do see the blue fringing going towards the center over here, and the red and yellow going away from the center. Yep, these stars have the blue fringing with the red and yellow fringing going away to the edge, this edge. And there is a bit of star elongation. And again, this lateral chromatic aberration showing up as well with the blue, but there also seems to be a bit of purple, so we're kind of getting a mix of chromatic aberration in my opinion. Pretty bright star here. Yeah, not awful though, but we do see the lateral and longitudinal chromatic aberrations. Well, not too shabby. Again, you know, it all comes down to your personal preference and how tolerant you are of these types of aberrations. I think overall that the optics performed pretty well, and you know, for the money, it's definitely a bargain. So wherever this review takes you in your astrophotography journey, I just hope you found this review helpful. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to support this channel, please consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon page and subscribing to my YouTube channel. And as always, I just really appreciate all of your guys' support, and until the next video, I hope you all have clear skies.